You are listening to Productivity Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. Amber is a sought-after productivity coach, trainer, speaker, and writer who gives entrepreneurs the straight talk on personal productivity. No BS fluff or overused jargon. Just actionable strategies to get results and succeed in business. And here is your host, Amber De La Garza, the Productivity Specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Productivity Straight Talk. Today is episode 273. 5 practical ways to scale in uncertain times with Benjamin Friedman. If you're a business owner who wants to learn effective business strategies, improve time management, and elevate productivity to maximize profits, reduce stress, and make time what matters most, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. I'm looking forward to you meeting our guest, Benjamin Friedman. Benjamin has been helping tech founders build, scale, and grow their startups for over 2 decades. His work leading business operations and finance led to many successful complete mergers and acquisitions, equity raises, and debt financing. Applying lessons from years of bumpy startup rides, Benjamin started his own company in 2019 to help founders address gaps in capacity, scale quickly, and grow exponentially. He recently published a modular handbook, Scale, Reach Your Peak, that offers over 130 articles on leadership, growth, sales, marketing, operations, finance, and teams. In 5 minutes, learn what you don't know. As mentioned in the title, we're going to be talking to Benjamin about how to scale in uncertain times. And I think you and I can both agree we are most certainly in uncertain times. And I am hearing that a lot from my clients. And I'm not just hearing, oh, it's uncertain times. No, we're not using those specific words always, but we're using words like things have changed a bit in the sales process. It's a bit harder to get people to say yes. The sales process seems like it's longer. Fewer people are reaching out about work. And it also just seems like things are just a little bit different, right? And so maybe we're not using very specific words, but I think you and I both know things feel different. Well, I wanted to talk to Benjamin because I do understand that we are in uncertain times. But what you'll hear Benjamin and I talking about is how we are always in uncertain times. This just might seem a little bit different. And I think it's worth listening because we're giving you very practical ways to scale your business. And you, my friend, have already made it through uncertain times. There's no way that you've gotten this far in your business without pushing through very uncertain times, most notably and recently, a pandemic. But uncertainty can come from everywhere. It's just not political or economic. It's uncertain if your team member is going to quit on you, if your partner and your relationship in your business is going to work out. It's uncertain if that contract gets fulfilled or the client says yes. And so how do we move through the thing that is most certain, which is uncertainty? And that's what we dive into in today's episode. Before we jump into my conversation with Benjamin, I just want to let you know that I am here to help. In fact, not just help, but I want to work with you. I want to partner with you. If the challenges in your business currently are around managing your time, creating efficiency, making a new hire, reducing the stress and overwhelm of running a business, or making strategic decisions that will help you level up your business, then I would love to talk to you. You may be feeling a bit like things have slowed down a little bit. And for many of my clients, business was really, really good over the last few years. And this slowdown is expected. It's going to be a correction in the market. But my question to you is this: are you going to take this time of quote unquote a slowdown to reinvest in your business, build the systems, the processes, learn new skill sets, build your team, now that there is the time to do that? One of the biggest reasons why we don't create efficiency systems or train our team or create a new process, learn a new skill set, create a new schedule that works for us is because we tell ourselves there's not enough time. And for you, that might have been feeling very, very true when there was so much business to handle. Well, this is a gift, and don't miss this gift. The gift of a little bit of a slowdown is a gift to be able to refocus your energy into building your business so that the next cycle, you are even bigger and stronger and more efficient than ever before. So, should we be talking? If you want to work on your business and love for me to be partnered with you to do so, then I invite you to schedule a discovery call so that we can discuss what that might look like and determine if we are a right fit to work together. So to schedule that call, head on over to amberdelagarza.com/call. And now let's meet our guest and get to the straight talk. Welcome to Productivity Straight Talk, Benjamin. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Amber. How are you?
I'm so good. We just got to do a little bit of pre-talk. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Before we dive in, though, why don't you share a little bit with our listeners about something we didn't learn in your official bio and why I get to talk to you about scaling today?
No, that sounds great. Something that is perhaps implied in my bio, but not explicit. I've been working with startups and small businesses for over 20 years now, typically around business operations and finance. And it tended to be about a 3-year tenure when I was operating as an employee, because I would come in, install a bunch of systems, processes, work with teams. The company would hit an inflection point, might get a fundraising round. And then around 3 years after I started, there would be some sort of M&A or other event. And somebody would pat me on the back and say, "Hey, Benjamin, you've done a great job. Good luck in your next one." And so that happened many times. And it was this bittersweet feeling. And then I finally realized a few years ago that if I were working across multiple small businesses, it's a way to optimize my skill set, expertise, and come and provide value exactly where needed. And that's been a wonderful transition for me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very similar to my journey as well, is that before starting my company, what I had done was I would go into the company or different departments, and I would be the person that could see challenges. I could see solutions. I would set up processes and systems. Same thing. Great job. We have this other issue. And then on to the next thing. I'm like, no, I just built the thing. Like, let me do this. But in the end, that's actually what I enjoyed. And the skill set that they saw most useful was kind of going into a mess, cleaning it up, and then getting out, right? And then on to the person that's really primed for just maintaining that moving forward for the business. So very similar. And then we both went out and started our own business so that we could really highlight our skill set. So that good for us, right?
Yes.
That's awesome. And now we get to help the world with our unique skill sets. Well, we are talking about how to scale in uncertain times. And to say we're in uncertain times is probably way too brief and too simple to say. I think that we're all feeling very uncertain times for various reasons. And so why don't you just start off with what kind of uncertain times that you are referring to for our businesses, and then we can get into the 5 ways that we can continue to grow our businesses while we feel so. Uncertain is a nice word. A little bit of fear is probably going on, the unknown. So I'll kick that off to you.
Thank you so much. So founders are certainly used to a little bit of uncertainty. But in the last few years, there's been a large amount. And first, I want to think about the premise here. So no matter what, even if our business is doing well, there's still going to be uncertainty around the market, the economy, stakeholders, the team. But the one certainty that we can always count on is that we, the founder, will be involved throughout the whole journey. So I wanted to have this discussion today and really talk about how to hone our priorities in order to make the best choices available. And I think that starts off with planning. And really, It starts with why you as a founder have gotten into this business in the first place. What is the founder problem fit that you struggled with that inspired you to take this incredible, daunting, challenging yet exciting journey and come up with your vision, your values, and really your purpose for business?
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, to your point about uncertainty and uncertain times, it just changes, right? Like when COVID happened, I remember immediately. In fact, I've been getting like the social media reminders because it's right about this time, March, a few years ago, about how to pivot. And in that time, I remember just having this sense of peace to say, yes, like it's COVID, there's so many unknowns. And boy, did we not know what we were getting into then. But really, like, is anything certain? Are your employees staying with you certain? Is it that your product or your suppliers or your vendor, any of that certain? And it's not, but we kind of live in a world where we tell ourselves it's certain and then we're shocked. And I love this premise of just saying like, no, it's actually all uncertain. So how do you move through that anyways? And so to start off with planning, when I hear you say that, I'm like, yes, planning's great. But I think it's the first place as business owners we get stuck to say, well, how do we plan for the thing we don't know? How do we plan for the outcomes that we can't even, really predict? So what would you share with us around that?
Yes, no, that's a great prompt. So as I think about it, and this comes a lot from my finance background, there are going to be some things we know with certainty, and then other things that we're definitely not sure about at all. But it's laying out different scenarios. And the reason for doing this is you want to maximize your options. So the sooner you start thinking about what could happen, what do I expect to happen? What could happen if things go really well and we move faster than expected? What could happen if we get a curveball or two and things go off track? Then you think through those scenarios. You can put some budgets behind it, some plans behind it. I'm not talking about whole business plans here, but it does make sense to outline 3 different scenarios. What you expect to happen, what happens if things go better, and what happens if things are not so good. And then you put a timeline for yourself. I typically recommend checking quarterly on those scenarios you came up with. It's frequent enough that you can dig in and make corrections, but not so much that you're caught up in the strategy side when I know a lot of our audience is constantly in the day-to-day. And then figure out what type of data you want to collect and measure against those scenarios. Be really honest with yourself. It's tempting to listen to what your competitors are doing, but figure out what metrics are important to you and your industry and your customers so that you're measuring if things are going the way you expected. And again, if it's too fast, you can adjust that way. Too slow, you can adjust the other way. But that's how I think about planning.
Absolutely. And I love that. You said data. And I want our listeners to hear that, because when we're hearing our competitors or the economy or watching the news or any social media, then we start having the temptation of making business decisions based on how we feel. And I've had some recent conversations with clients that say, oh my gosh, like it's so uncertain with the economy, like my industry could totally shift, and like where are the clients going to come from? And I'm like, that's possible, but it's possible at any time. What are your current numbers saying? What is the influx of leads? What is your revenue this month? And many of them are like, I haven't seen a change. So we want to borrow the fear from the future that we're unsure of, but it sometimes freezes us, right? Like, oh my gosh, are we panic and make decisions now? And what I loved about what you said was like, don't freeze, observe it, and then know what the number is. Like, what is the thing that you're going to look at, the metric, to say, okay, now's the time to move into a different action instead of doing it based on how we felt when there was no change in the business. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And to build on what you're saying, Amber, I think about the large technology companies that just continued to hire through COVID, not thinking that anything was going to change. And presumably they had access to more data than you and I could ever read. And yet they couldn't look at that data and see that this is a short-term effect. They might need to hire a few people, but they really should have thought about it in a more fractional or exponential way versus hiring all these full-time staff, which, a couple of years later, they have to let go and go back to pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So after planning, and obviously the planning, I love that you said is really anchored in what your vision is, your mission, like what it is that you stand for. And I think that's a great place to always remind ourselves about anytime we're doing planning or goal setting or strategy. All right. Anything else you want to share with us about planning before we go to your next step?
So I think we've done a good job there in planning. I don't want to go too far because my hunch, based on my experience, is that a lot of people don't want to think about planning too much. So it's important for us to put a stake in the ground and say, you need to do it. You need to support it with the right data. And then you put in times to check what you set out to do. And that leads into my next piece of advice, which is to really focus on seeking advice. A lot of people think that if you just keep doing things more and more, you'll get better. But that type of self-learning will eventually plateau. If you think about incredible athletes, fantastic artists, amazing business leaders, they all have in common that they've turned to coaches or other types of trainers to constantly push them to do better. Even top-notch world-class athletes and business leaders still get coached, still get advice, and you want to constantly push those boundaries to do better. So think about how you can gain perspectives. You want to reach out to your peers, to perhaps investors or board members, to your team, to your customers, of course. And then one thing I like to think about is the concept of a challenge network. I believe it was Adam Grant who introduced the term, and it's really bringing people on to advise you who they're not going to just tell you what you want to hear. They're going to tell us what we need to hear. And that can be hard. And these could be people we don't necessarily want to hang out and have a beer or a coffee with, but they are going to tell us the truth. They're going to do it in a constructive way. So they're looking out for our best interests, but they're going to tell us what we absolutely need to hear in the moment. And if we're surrounded by those people, and if we're really pushing the other people around us to give us honest feedback and show that we can accept it, that's going to help us course correct no matter what happens during periods of uncertainty.
Yeah. You know, there's a belief that I see or I hear, commonly. And it's almost this underlying belief of like, I should be able to do these things in my business. I should be able to know the marketing. I should be able to strategize. I should be able to be a good planner and then also be the good business owner that's providing the service and the expertise. And I should be a good leader, all this shoulding on ourselves. And it's true, like your skill sets got your business to where it's at. But at some point, the business ultimately needs a skill set that might not be in your wheelhouse, right? And so either you can go and, like you said, get a coach or a trainer and you can increase your skill set or you can ask for help, right? Borrowing somebody else's skill set. And I believe that's a bit of what you do for companies where they find themselves needing additional support around operations, but they also can't quite see themselves needing it full time. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about that too when we talk about seeking advice and support.
Sure. I find myself working with founders in two scenarios. One is there's an area that they have little to no experience. That could be finance, business operations, sales, marketing, human resources. There is a whole range of considerations as the business grows. And it's not expected that any leader is going to have that full skill set, to your point. And then the other scenario is when leaders start to find themselves so inundated with opportunities that they need to delegate and partner with people like us to find a great way to move forward and optimize all their resources. So that might be a scenario where I take on a specific project or I work with a team. Sometimes I find myself mentoring a junior member who's wonderful and smart and motivated, but just doesn't have the experience, honestly hasn't made all the mistakes that I've made. And I'm happy to work with them to try and avoid those mistakes and talk through the opportunities and challenges ahead. But in these ways, I work with founders to really supplement their skills and help them push forward.
Okay, I just love this because we talk a lot about, hiring somebody to help us with the day-to-day of our businesses, but to think like actually hiring someone that can help us take us to that next step, that next role in the business or fulfill the role. I don't think it's talked about as often as just a regular hire in the business. So I love this. And I love that this support is out there. I was eager to talk to you because actually I shared this before we hit record, is that while my business is 100% virtual, some of my clients are 100% virtual. Many of my clients are like, they can't quite even wrap their head around what a virtual VA would look like an administrative or an executive assistant, right? And so we're all learning different ways to do business and it's ever changing. But then to think, I could hire a fractional COO. Like I don't have to pay, multiple six figures for 40 hours. I can get that expertise in my business. I want more people to understand that it's even more accessible today to get this expertise help, even if your business doesn't quite need it full time.
Right. So, some of the reasons that founders really benefit from a fractional COO, you can bring in somebody on a flexible basis. Maybe it's for project, maybe it's interim, maybe you're exploring the role full time, but rather than commit, and that's a huge stress test on the company, you take the smaller step of bringing in a fractional COO, see how the rest of the leadership team adapts, see how that role could function, and then decide. And then, of course, on a cost basis, it makes a lot of sense. You're not paying for full time plus what other benefits may occur. And you have somebody who's looked across different companies. So they're bringing in not only their background and expertise, but also a level of objectivity, which might be really useful to the leaders, as I talked about earlier, getting a different perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I also have business coaches, right? Like I can see so clearly when a client's talking to me because I'm objective and I can like laser focus through the whole story. It's actually one of those, one of my biggest strengths, but I'm a human too. So when it's my own business, it feels like, oh my gosh, no, it's not as easy as these three options. It's all these options in our heads. And so when you can really lean on someone else that can come in objectively, it's just so powerful and helping move through decision making a lot quicker. So I love that.
That's funny. I often tell leaders that I have the luxury of being able to step outside the day-to-day and look at the big picture. And I try very carefully to use that word because it is a luxury. I know what they're going through. And for us to be able to look at the big picture, hopefully gives them a perspective that's hard to get when you have customers yelling and employees, with their concerns and all these other things happening.
Yeah, I've often said, I think it's one of the hardest things that we ask ourselves to do is go from the day-to-day to big vision thinking. We know we need to do it, but the actual practicality of handling a client that's angry and you're like, okay, today's my strategy thinking day, and then someone on the team calls out, right? Like you're in the day-to-day, but then you are asking yourself to step away and kind of create this silo of an environment where you can really think from a higher level. It's not impossible, but it is certainly one of the hardest things I think business owners are tasked with for sure.
Yes, very much.
All right. So your next step, 5 ways to scale, is focus. I can't wait. This is one of my favorite words. So what do you want to share with us about how to focus?
So in thinking about focus, I really want to shift attention from understanding the concerns, recognizing the uncertainty, to what is it exactly that you can impact in your work. And so this is where we just talked about it. It's funny. I want to encourage leaders to move away from constantly thinking about the day-to-day and working in the business and start working on the business. So I want people to think about taking different approaches, how to apply the advice they're getting, how to take time to think about the whole picture. And I find that the best way to implement this is by running experiments. And it's just like we learned in high school science. You want to come up with a hypothesis. It's if I, spend some money this way or spend some time that way, this is what I expect to see. These are the results, the outcomes I'm looking for. And then you want to measure them. You want to find a way from the outset that you're measuring those outcomes or results that you're looking to see. And then whether it's 6 weeks or 3 months tops, you want to see where are you at that point, and you decide, what are your next steps? Is it go, no go? Do you double down? Do you stop running the experiment because it's detrimental? Perhaps you learn something new about the business or your customers because you ran an experiment. But that's a way to really take this idea of focus and apply it very readily to the business.
Okay, well, I love the idea of experimenting. When I work with my clients on creating their strategic plan, like wrapping up their quarter and planning for next quarter, I call it a feedback loop. And there's 3 questions we ask. And you kind of alluded to them. So same thing. It's just a similar framework is what worked, right? I want to start with the positive. So you experimented with something, even if it was like a dumpster fire, there's something in there that worked that could be a positive. So what worked?
Right.
And then the next one is what didn't work, pulling all of that out and asking. And then the third one is what could work. And I use the word could work because I'm also leaning into it's an experiment, it's a hypothesis. Like, okay, if we switch gears, what could work? Or when you're even strategizing about what you're going to focus on for next quarter, it's not 100% this, like we never know what's going to work or not work. So it's a could work, like an experiment. And so I just wanted to just mention that, but also something that was helpful to me in my own business journey was using the word experiment for mindset. So as a business owner, we are can be incredibly attached to the outcome. And so much so, I say that I was like a dog with a bone. You got a plan, I'll work the plan, even if it's not of service. And so to say, oh, it's an experiment, it invites that evaluation and it allows it to fail without saying, oh my gosh, it had to succeed. So for me, just labeling strategies in the business as an experiment was very beneficial for me to, back out, change my mind, and not be crushed when it didn't work out.
I know, I love that as well. When you think about these opportunities in terms of experiments, it allows you, hopefully, to pull away from being caught up in the strategy and being caught up in the day-to-day. So strategically, it's tempting to make it perfect. You want to think through all the implications, maturations, interdependencies, and you just get so caught up in your head that it's hard to pull the trigger and get started. If you're so stuck in the day-to-day, it's hard to pull your head out and say, what could we be doing differently to alleviate our situation, to allow us to grow, to better serve our customers? Phrasing it as an experiment gives you the justification to say, hey, we're going to try this. We're all not sure if it's going to work. We can be very open to the team and even to customers that we're running an experiment. We want to get feedback. We want to see if this is going to help the situation do better. And it really pulls us out of either of those loops, either too much strategy or too much tactical.
Yes. So I always say it's like, this is permission to have version 1.0. Right. When we're strategizing, like you said, we think we have to have it all figured out and all the answers and perfect. And in my experience, that just never happens. And so just by also saying, can this be version 1.0? Like, there's going to, even if it works out wonderfully, there's going to be a version 2.0. To your point, even if you double down, there's going to be tweaks and a version 2.0. And just that little permission that we can give ourselves, I think allows us to move into action. And here at Productivity Straight Talk, we're always trying to figure out, well, why are we not moving into action? How can we overcome that? And sometimes it's just the words we choose can change the way we perceive or see the situation for sure.
This is great. And it reminds me of one other point. So we started off talking about uncertainty and how to respond. Allowing ourselves to experiment gives us the opportunity to be more resilient against future uncertainty. So what I mean is if we run an experiment, we see if this can work and that could work. Maybe we learn something, maybe at the time in the current conditions, it's not going to be effective. But if something uncertain happens and the situation changes, we can go back to what we learned and perhaps our data from that experiment and say, well, the time wasn't right 2 or 3 years ago, but maybe it is now. This loosely reminds me of back when I was dating. Sometimes you meet somebody who's fantastic, but they were already committed to somebody else. But if you were to meet them again in a couple of years, it could work out wonderfully. So we run these experiments to build our resilience and increase our opportunities in the future.
I love that. And as you were saying that, what came up for me was this is going to be like behind the scenes, actual conversations with clients right now. The economy is incredibly uncertain right now. And yet I've literally had to say with clients that I've worked with since before the pandemic, you lived through a pandemic. If I asked you 4 years ago if you thought your business and you and your family could survive a pandemic, you would say, she's lost her mind. What do you mean a pandemic? Like, that's not even in the realm of possibility. What I love about that is that what we thought was impossible now becomes positive proof of like, yeah, something could happen. There is uncertainty, but you have positive proof that you can move through very uncertain times, such as COVID. So that might be the only silver lining in the whole, global pandemic. But wow, what a benefit all of us have as business owners to say we made it through that.
That's a great reminder. I love that context.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. All right. Next step, self-awareness. What do you have to share with us? This is a really big one. This could be probably an entire episode for business owners. So I love that this is one of your steps.
So I'm going to start off with a fun fact. I'm not necessarily proud of it, but I find that every time I walk out of a store or a new place, a neighborhood I haven't been, there's a greater than 50% chance that I will turn the wrong direction to where I have to go next. And that's fine. I can usually adapt. But in self-awareness, this is something where most of us are more often wrong than we realize. When you ask people like, are you a good driver? Would you lead in a crisis? Whatever the scenario is, usually 80 to 90% of the people think, oh yeah, of course, that would be me. But as you and I know, it cannot be 80%. Only 50% or less are going to be better than everyone else, right? Are you a good driver? 85% of the people say yes, but clearly that cannot be the case. And those of us who drive absolutely know it's not the case.
That's right.
So self-awareness is incredibly important to a leader to help us to deal with the pressure that's going to happen, to help us build work relationships, to help us make better decisions. So those are all the reasons why I encourage people to invest. And then I think about this two ways. One is personal and the other is interpersonal. So personally, things we can do include writing, holding ourselves accountable, mindfulness, reflection. These are all variations of taking the time to make sure that we're pausing, assessing the situation, recognizing what we are bringing to the dynamic. Half of a relationship is us. With accountability, I personally write lists of what I want to accomplish for the week, for the month, for the quarter, and then I will constantly revisit those lists in a regular cadence. And then interpersonally, we talked earlier about a feedback loop and about, what I loved the way you framed it, actually. I think it was what worked, what didn't work, and what could work. And in that type of framing, we go to people to seek advice. I encourage founders and leaders to talk to diverse people. It's tempting to talk to people who we're comfortable with. That's just human nature and the way we're wired. But go to people you don't normally talk to, whether that's customers, members of the team, or even people completely outside of your industry. Go to different media from time to time, visit new places, look at new industries and new businesses. Because in all these scenarios, you're going to get feedback that you might not have expected around ways to run a business and to operate as a leader. That's really going to help you to take yourself and your company to the next level.
Yes. Self-awareness is so helpful just in being a leader, but also realizing where it kind of ties into conversations we've already had. I believe that when you're more self-aware, you're able to non-judgmentally identify where there's gaps and ask for help. Right? Because you're aware that maybe that's not your strength. And I love that you also gave a lot of other examples of ways to be more self-aware, which is, changing up your environment and reaching out to different people and getting different perspectives. I think that that's so important because as a business owner, I truly believe we are always growing. I think that business ownership is like one of the most difficult personal development journeys, right? It just forces you to keep getting out of your comfort zone and try new things and learn new things about yourself and how you show up in hard times and good times. And all of that is around the self-awareness. So thank you so much for sharing the importance of self-awareness to get our businesses to the next level. So after we have, really been focusing on self-awareness, what is next in the ways to scale our business effectively?
So we want to bring all these areas we've discussed together and think about how to optimize for the future. I love how you just said we're always growing, or if we want to push ourselves, we can always be growing. Mm-hmm. And I think about these things and communicate it in terms of a growth mindset. That is, whether we consider the immediate results to be a success or a failure, if we take a growth mindset, we are always learning. We're always getting information that we could apply to the future if the situation changes or the team changes. But we are constantly learning in a growth mindset. And that's a fantastic way to go through any times, whether they're clearly certain and successful or uncertain and daunting. I think about when it comes to optimization, the ways to take energy and apply it correctly. And I'll just pause to say, I think that energy is our most finite resource. A lot of people consider money to be finite. Others will say time is the most important. Those are both definitely finite resources, but the most is energy, because how we apply the energy that we have in any given day, any given year is going to be very limited. And it's going to allow us, if we are very aware of our energy, it's going to allow us to focus on time management to best optimize our energy cycles. And then I think about productivity tips. This is more your rubric than mine for sure. But I always, to give some specific examples, I always like to block out times for deep work. I always use my calendar as a to-do list. That way, if something else comes up, I specifically have to decide, is the thing I'm moving no longer important and it's gone, or am I moving it to another day and just coming back to it later than expected? And then I think about, like, how can I put myself in the right mindset, the right environment? So when I do my deep work, for example, I go to my favorite restaurant and I just sit there and I put my headphones in and I'm down and I'm enjoying a good meal, but I'm focused on my deep work. And now every time I go in, my brain is already spinning with different ideas and thinking about ways to grow. So building those habits. And then finally, I'll touch on, this could be a whole other podcast too, but thinking about resilience around physical and mental health. When we're faced with uncertainty, it's tempting to stop exercising, to just eat whatever we can, to not sleep because we're worried. And in fact, we are cycling in a way that's making the problems worse. We are not taking control of what we can. And that makes the uncertainty even harder because we're not rested, we're not well fed, we're not energized to come up with the decisions that we need to break through the uncertainty.
Okay, well, that was a lot. And I want to unpack some of that. I think we have some time because those were some really, really good nuggets. I want to speak first to your first one, which was the growth mindset. And I know I've said this before on previous podcasts, but it's worth saying again, is that had I known, like before starting my business, had I known what I needed to learn to be a successful business owner, it would have froze me in my tracks. I would not have thought it was possible. And now, 10 years later, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to meet the woman I am in 5 more years and 10 more years, because the business has literally been such a positive impact. And because it's this like environment of consistent growth and consistent learning, challenging me mentally, physically too. And you talked on that, mentally, physically, emotionally. And for that, I am so grateful for my business. And that's because I have chosen the growth mindset. And I hope everyone that's listening feels that way, but I think that you can feel that way, because if you think about all of the things you need to learn in in a not positive way, that can be so daunting. And so for me, I always say it is like, great, this is another opportunity to grow and change. Anyways, that's the growth mindset for me and my experience. And I wish that for everyone that's listening here. With regards to energy being a finite resource, I 100% agree. If I could change time management and not use that word, I would, but then nobody would tune in because they wouldn't really know what I was talking about if I just said, this is a productivity and energy management podcast or attention management podcast. So as you were saying that, it was a yes. And the thing that I'm always reminded of is that I am generally out of energy before I'm ever out of time. And that can look way different, right? It could mean there's still hours left in the day, but you're out of energy. It could mean that you're still in your workday, but you don't have the capacity to make decision making or strategic thinking. You're just energetically drained, and there is the time for it. A lot of what we end up talking about here at Productivity Straight Talk is about how we, make good decisions with what we're focusing on and the energy. So yes, finite resource for sure. And then I think that actually loops to what you ended with, because for me, energy has been so important. So I've been on my own journey. I hired a health coach 3 months ago, specifically around energy management. It's not about weight management. It wasn't anything like that. And I literally have the most energy I have had in over probably 2 decades, a decade and a half. Like, I didn't even know it was possible. I thought I ate pretty clean and led a pretty good life. But for me, my desires for what I wanted to do with my time, and I'm using quote marks, far exceeded my energy availability. And so that's when I started focusing on what can I do to increase my energy. Wait till those episodes come out. For those of you listening, this is a big teaser. I want to be on the other side of it before I share all the details. I'm in the middle of it, and I went into it as an experiment. And I think it's really what we need to be focusing on as leaders and business owners for sure, because it's something in our toolbox gets depleted pretty quickly.
Yeah, so that makes a ton of sense. And I'm so glad that we're on the same page here. We started off by talking about uncertainty. It makes a lot of sense that when we face challenges and the struggles hit us, we're tempted to put our head down and curl up. And if you enter a growth mindset, you recognize the areas you can control, impact, you can run experiments, you can, focus your energy the right way. You start to think, okay, this is not where I want to be today, but I have the tools to move forward and get to where I want to be. And I don't have to measure it in terms of years. I can measure it in terms of days or even hours. When it's the hardest days for us, we might say, okay, what can I do in the next hour to feel like I've accomplished something? Maybe, it's wash the dishes or, send that email or whatever it is. And we can just build on that. So, this is great that we're on the same page. I'm interested to hear those future podcasts around the health coach and energy management. That's going to be fantastic.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for giving me the platform to share it with my audience. I wasn't expecting to yet. It is definitely on the programming, but that was a nice little teaser for those that will be around in the next couple months when I share. All right. So I want you to just, if you can do a couple things as we wrap up, I'd like you to recap, because this has been a great conversation, but I want you to recap the 5 ways to scale in uncertain times. And before you do that, I just want to share that I love that these were all really, really practical. And even if we took out uncertain times and just said 5 ways to scale, these are all things that you absolutely can focus on that will help you as a business owner and leader and your business grow. So let's recap for our listeners today.
Sure, great. My younger daughter, when she was in first grade, was given an award for beginning with the end in mind. And I thought that was a funny award for a 7-year-old, but it was fantastic. She won it. But yes, let's think about planning before we do anything else. Where do we want to be? How are we going to measure it? And how frequently are we going to come back to our plans? From there, it's seeking advice, talking to people as much as possible. Of course, your stakeholders, your team, your customers, But then we also talked about a challenge network and going out to people who are really going to confront you with what you need to hear. The next point was around focus, thinking about spending time working on the business and running experiments around that, where it's very much a controlled experiment. You're mitigating the risk. But to your point during our conversation, really giving yourself the leeway to try new things and see where it puts you. And maybe you'll learn something now, or maybe it's something to be used later. From there, we talked about self-awareness. No surprise that it's on our minds, but really important, both to take time personally, whether that's through writing, mindfulness, reflection, or interpersonally, talking with others. Make sure you're getting around to different people, different situations, different industries. We get the most creativity when we push outside of our day-to-day lives. And then finally, how to optimize all this. It started with a growth mindset. We can always learn from our situation. This could be a horrible day, but we are going to rebound from it. Things are going to get better. And it's because, in part, we've learned from today how to apply the finite energy. And then we talked around some productivity tips to help us be more resilient, because throughout this whole journey, we are the one constant. This is a marathon. So it always helps to remember that.
Absolutely. Well, that was very well wrapped up. So if our listeners want to learn more about your services, and I'd love for you to share about your book. You have a book as well. Can you share all of that with our listeners here today?
Yes, happily. I appreciate it. So the website is www.webuildscalegrow.com. On there, you'll find more about my work, what I do, and then there's a tab for my blog, which I update weekly. I also took a lot of these ideas and put it together in a book called Scale, Reach Your Peak. That's available as paperback and ebook on Amazon. It is almost 500 pages. I'm almost tired recapping that fact, but I'm so glad it's out there now. It has over 130 different articles, which are meant to be very modular. And what I mean by that is in 3 to 5 minutes, you can read any one of those articles, learn about public relations, about fundraising, about management, about sales, marketing, any of those subjects. And you don't have to read another word anywhere else in the book. It's all meant to be self-contained. It combines my experience and my research. So it's not just me talking. I'm trying to channel the experts and give you the best information to start to put a framework around your questions.
Excellent. Well, we will be sure to be linking out in the show notes your website as well as your book. Thank you so much for bringing this conversation to Productivity Straight Talk and being a guest here.
I love this. And for those in the audience who can't see Amber right now, she has been totally energetic. So definitely look forward to those future podcasts.
Yes. Thank you so much. I have loved having you listen to this episode of Productivity Straight Talk, and I sure hope it was valuable, but I need to be straight with you. No change, no change. Without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. So based on my conversation with Benjamin and the 5 steps to scale your business, what is one step that you can commit to taking? I think that now that you've listened to the interview, you can clearly see that this is truly about business fundamentals, going back to the basics, and really doing that consistently will most certainly, and I am in 100% agreement with Benjamin on this, most certainly create the result you're looking for. In uncertain times, I think it's incredibly important not to overcomplicate things, not to spread your energy out among a bunch of different opportunities and projects, but really narrowing in on and ensuring that you're doing the fundamentals consistently in your business. So, what is that commitment for you? What is the action that you will take based on our conversation today? I can't wait to hear from you. If you would love to share with me what you're taking from this conversation and what you're committed to doing and taking action and being consistent on, I would love to hear from you over on Instagram. It's where I enjoy hanging out. You can find me over on Instagram at Amber_De La Garza. Send me a DM. I would love to hear from you. And lastly, before we close out, as a reminder, I would also love to take what you're learning here on the podcast of Productivity Straight Talk and take it further and deeper and partner with you on implementing these strategies in your business. Partner with you to create the accountability to show up consistently in your business. I would love to jump into your business and ask the questions that you may not be asking so that you can get different results. If that interests you, then I invite you to schedule a discovery call. You can do that by heading on over to amberdelagarza.com/call. So that's my straight talk for today. Until next time, have a productive week.